Hello, BookTube. Despite the fact that it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit here in Boston and bright and sunny as if it were the dog days of summer, despite the fact that it is roasting hot and it's going to stay roasting hot here, we are nevertheless at the end of August. We are approaching September. And whenever we approach a new month, BookTube likes to line up with TBR videos, to be read videos, where they talk about what they're going to read in the upcoming month. And I love watching those videos. I often take notes from those videos. And I would like to do them myself. It's a little bit more complicated, maybe a bit in my case, because I plan to read an enormous number of books in September, and they all fall, or most of them do, aside from gems that I find along the way, along very narrow parameters. They are new releases coming out in September or October in the American book market, from major and minor presses, university presses, on the 15 or 16 genres that I like to read. So my TBRs have variety, but it's not the same kind of variety as whatever. Most other TBRs are organized by whatever people's fancy takes them, whereas there's an element of fancy in mine, but I am going to read these things anyway. Even if my fancy doesn't take them, I'm still going to read them and find out what the shape of the market looks like for September and October. And as a result of that, I have read a great number of books in September already. My TBR is partially, as I've already said on this channel, a TBR BY, a to be read by you, if I've got recommendations. And I have a few recommendations for September. So I thought I'd make just a general video of a September TBR. I could make 10 or 11 of these along different themes or using different books. Maybe I will. Maybe a self-published TBR. Maybe a TBR consisting only of books that I have not read. There's no law on BookTube that says I can't do more than one TBR video for an upcoming month. Now, is there? People do it all the time. They do their general TBRs, then they also talk about their upcoming events. So I put together some books. There's the bean. We are reconciled. I've offended the presence in a number of ways today. I, for instance, trimmed the hair on her face, a little bit of her eyebrows, but especially all this bushy stuff that grows on the bridge of her nose and directly under her eyes, that it makes her face hot, and it also occludes her vision. So it has to get trimmed on a regular basis, and she doesn't like that at all. The closer that the trimming shears, the scissors get to her face and her ears, the less she likes it, because the louder it sounds. It's a learning experience. It's a learning curve for both of us. I've never had a dog I needed to trim before, but not only that, but I worked all morning long. She's wonderful, wonderful companion, wonderful company. A purely indoor dog, a purely human company dog. I can't help but think that's terriers in general. The remit whose job in the time that they were created as a separate family of dogs was largely indoors. I don't know what the reason is. Maybe I've got a really personable little dog. But we spent the whole morning that way, and with the little air conditioner chugging away in the window, totally unprepared me for how monstrously hot and humid it is outside. So that was another offense against the crown, is that we got outside and I realized, no, we can't. We can walk, certainly. We can meet some people. You can do your filthy, sinful business, but we can't cover ground. We may never be able to cover ground again. The meteorology forecasts say that this is going to break. This is our 10th heat wave of the summer, that it's going to break tomorrow. That tomorrow will also be 95 degrees Fahrenheit in Boston, but that after that the temperatures will go back to something like what they're supposed to be this time of year, but I don't believe it. How many times have I promised myself, I can't tell Frida this, but how many times have I promised myself, well, we're curtailing our walks now, but as soon as relief comes, we'll go on longer walks, and then the relief doesn't come. So we may never have to do that again. That'd be a shame, but we're reconciled, as you can see. We hugged and kissed and made up. So anyway, the books. We're going to start off in an artsy-fartsy way. We're going to start off with some triptychs. some 3-book arches. And we're going to start off with 3 books about Russia, which are coming out in September. The first one is by the well-known best-selling author Anthony Beevor. This is his big book, Russia, which is about the Russian revolutions and civil war. So it kicks off with, societal unrest and the execution of the Romanovs, and it goes from there. It taps into what mainstream publishers rather cynically are observing is perhaps an elevated interest in all things Russia on the part of the American book buying public, which, when you're talking about new release hardcovers, for publishers, for those mainstream publishers, those 5 or 6 big houses, American book buying is essentially New York book buying. And maybe that is true. Maybe that gamble will pay off. Beaver is reliably good. He's reliably interesting to read. This is, I don't think, his main area of interest, but I still found it extremely readable. Oh, what you doing? You're determined to steal the show on this video, aren't you? Are you going to? Sometimes she hops down from there and hops all the way down to the floor. Sometimes she doesn't. Sometimes she just sticks next to me. Now she's just going to stick next to me. It's not a good idea if it's hot. It's not particularly hot in this room, but I'm pretty warm. She's going to notice that in a minute and jump down. But anyway, that's the first of our Russian triptych. This was not by any means my favorite, Anthony Beaver, but good, solid stuff, as always, as you'd expect. Then this next author, I have not liked this author's work as much as a great many of his fans have. Another Russian book. This is The Story of Russia by Orlando Figes. And it is much broader in scope. The events and personalities of Beaver's book fit neatly into a couple of chapters in this book. I thought it was a bit of a slog. It smacked way too much of Wikipedia or graduate students to me. It didn't seem to really, like, a lot of people know this author from his book Natasha's Dance, which is about the culture of Russia. That seemed to me to crackle with a lot more original energy than this. I don't know what the reason for that is, whether or not maybe those publishers went to Orlando Figes, who is a well-known expert on Russia, and said, look, people are talking about Russia, could we get a Russia book out of you? I don't know if that's the case or not, but this was a little on the dull side, I thought. But the third part of our Russian triptych, I'm so bog standard, I love using fancy words like that. The third book is terrific. And I'm not just saying that because it is a patented Steve 800-page biography. I love those, I freely admit it. This is one of the first of the season. Certainly the first of what would once upon a time have been called the autumn. The fall book season is September. It's not going to feel like autumn if it's 100 degrees every day, but this is by an author that I know really well. Not personally, but his last book was a huge book on the Napoleonic Wars, and it was amazingly good. That is well-trod ground. It takes a lot to stand out. And the author is Alexander Berinsky, and Alexander Mika Beridzi, and he did stand out with his previous book. And he's decided for his new book to hone in on one key player in the Napoleonic Wars, and that is General Kutuzov, the man who defeated Napoleon's army. And this is, I think, probably one of the first full-length, full-dress biographies of this person in English. And it was really good. It was really, really good. Sweeping, authoritative, just I won't say delightful, because I don't want to lead anybody astray. If you don't already know how to read and enjoy 800-page biographies, you're not going to find this delightful. But if you do that as a matter of course, or if you're open to that, they can be done poorly and they can be done well. This is an example of it being done really, really well. And that's the meaning of the subtitle, A Life in War and Peace, is that Kutuzov was a hero of Tolstoy's. So that is the first triptych. Now we'll do a second triptych, which is works in translation. Just because Women in Translation Month is now coming to an end here on BookTube doesn't mean the translated works are ending. Far from it. There's a steady trickle that comes out in the American book market. That trickle tends to increase to a flow the closer we get to the autumn book buying season. And there are 3 new major works of translation that I want to make sure you know about, just in case. The first one is translated by Raymond Mackenzie, and it oddly is called Red and Black by Stendhal. This is from a university press. This is one of my favorite, I wanted to say modern novels, but you know what I mean. It's one of my favorite novels, I guess. I could say, certainly, if I were to make a list of 50 novels, this would be on it. I'm not sure that I understand. I haven't read this. I haven't read this translation yet. I've read the translation of this book into English. But I haven't read this one yet, and I'm not quite sure that I understand the choice of the title. The articles are in the original, so why they're not here, I don't know, and I don't know what that betokens for the translation, but I wouldn't miss this for all the mud in Egypt. Of course, if there's a new Stendhal translation, I'm going to read it. This next one I would, for tuppence, miss. But it'll be a big deal. It's a small press, but it will probably get reviewed. And it has been a while since I read this noxious piece of rambling incoherence. This is Thus Spake Zarathustra by Nietzsche. This is a translation by Michael Hulse. And I already know what I'm getting here. I will try. I will read this, and I will. It'll be probably my third read of this book in English, and I will do my best. I will divorce it from how deeply it has been embraced by dude bro culture. I will divorce it from how deeply it's been embraced by pothead so-called seeker culture that wants religion in their books, even though they claim they don't, that wants their books to transcend their world or reach into their heart and rearrange their carotid artery or anything like that. Books don't do that, and you are putting not only a nonsensical burden on them if you ask them to, but also an adolescent burden on them if you ask them to. That is a very arrested thing to do. That is an adolescent way to look at reading. That whole, looking at books as a bong hit, that they're going to blow you away, man, rather than thinking about them or even feeling them. Instead, it's that it has to make you high. And this book, I will divorce this book from all of that, because that's not fair, right? To import that to this book is not fair. This book did not intend to do any of that. Nietzsche wouldn't have had any idea that that was going to happen, and I don't think he'd have liked it. Mainly because he didn't like anything. Mainly because by the time he wrote this book, he was leaping with syphilis. So on one hand, I have always argued that reading stuff by someone who was literally biochemically insane when he wrote it is a waste of time. But on the other hand, this has been canonized. You get publishers to come out with new translations, so I will do it. And then the next one, the final in our translation triptych, is a cause for joy. Even if it's bad, it's still a cause for joy. It's still a cause to get people to think about it, to write about it, long standalone pieces about it. It is a great novel, one of the greatest novels, and it is The Betrothed by Manzoni. And this is a new translation this is for the Modern Library. Unfortunately, they gave it a hideous American cover. No idea what's going on here. Is this the Stepford Wives, or is this The Betrothed by Manzoni? I don't know. I don't know why they would give it an ugly cover like this, but this is a huge Italian novel, by many people's estimates, the greatest Italian novel ever written. And this is its first translation, I think, in English in a long time. Penguin Classics has a big, fat paperback of The Betrothed in their lineup. They've had it forever and ever. But unless I'm missing an academic press of some kind, that Penguin Classic translation was the last one. And that was a long time, if I'm right about that. So here's hoping that this sparks a lot of critical response, that this sparks a lot of interest on the part of critics. I read my fellow book critics. They don't read me, because all I do is review books. And I don't review books for them. I review books for you. So I'm not writing 10,000-word pieces about deeper meanings and sigils and signs and semiotics and whatnot. I'm just writing about what's done in the book, what you're going to encounter in the book, and trying to have a little fun along the way so that you enjoy reading the review. So I am a newspaper book reviewer, in other words, to put it that way. I don't have any shame about that, no self-conscious about that, but it is a dying profession. The longer book reviews tend to be the thing that gets brooded about on social media, that get tweeted and retweeted, that go viral, that get people jobs. And I don't mind that. Sometimes it can lead to a great deal of tedium. If the Nietzsche translation gets a lot of press, there'll be plenty of tedium to hand around. But plenty of people writing new long essays about Stendhal, I would love. And oh my God, long standalone pieces about this book. From some of the writers out there doing my work, I would love that. Absolutely love it. So those are 3 translations. Translated work. If you've been doing Women in Translation Month, or if you have a sweet tooth for books in translation anyway, the market will never let you down. Even in America, which is a very monoglot and xenophobic nation. It's a very internationally incurious culture. Even so, that doesn't apply to American readers. American readers tend to be fairly adventurous. They want to see what's new and out there, what the poets in Ghana are doing. So there'll always be a trickle of translations. We'll go through some of them if I do another triptych for October, or maybe another. September TBR. I could, like I said, do 10 of these. And then our next triptych is true crime. As I know a lot of you have a sweet tooth for that, and I do too. The first one is by Greg King and Penny Wilson. We've seen it on this channel before. It's Nothing But the Night. And this is his new book on the Leopold and Loeb murders, where two seemingly normal, well-to-do Chicago teenage boys lured a younger boy to his death. They killed him, and in a horrible way. It's described in graphic detail in every Leopold and Loeb book. And it didn't take long for them to be discovered and convicted and sent to trial, and that would have made headlines anyway, because it's genuinely weird. They didn't have a motive. They weren't brutes or raging, falling down psychopaths. They were both eloquent, well-dressed, came from some of the city's greatest families. It struck a chord with true crime watchers, with the American public, and if it hadn't already done that, it did that when the families hired Clarence Darrow to defend the boys. Because he was already a star. He was already a celebrity lawyer, and he did defend them. He went on at great length defending them, mainly in order to save them from the death penalty. Not so much to protest that they were innocent. And this book, the authors make a few fussy comments at the beginning about how this story has never really been told. The truth of this story has never really been told. For instance, the nature of the crime, or the nature of the psychological relationship between Leopold and Loeb. Who was the master and who was the submissive? Who was leading who? Who was getting the action done? And I don't know. I mean, I know you need an angle to sell a book, but I've read every major account of this crime, and a lot of the things in this book that claim to be revelatory are not. It's still really well done. And I think, if anything, the authors don't go far enough at the end, after the conviction. The boys were saved from death. They were sent to prison, which was... I won't stem-wind about this, but that is the peril that you get from lawyers. Lawyers lie in the courtroom. The whole purpose of the adversarial system is that you pay two liars to lie to the jury each, and the most convincing liar is supposed to be the one who is aided unknowingly by the truth of the matter. So the jury is supposed to see through all of the lies and the pettifoggery and the great eloquence and even the bone weariness. Darrow talked all day for his closing argument. Literally all day. Just not 15 minutes. He went on all day, 12 hours. These boys lured another boy to his death. They cold-bloodedly executed him with him crying for help and begging them not to. They deserved to die. And that was the justice of the case, and that would certainly have happened if it hadn't been for Clarence Darrow, who got them to live. Now, one of them was killed in prison, and the authors do a good bit of speculating about whether or not he was killed by the other one. And the other of the killers served out a sentence, can you believe it, was paroled. So not only did he go to prison instead of being hanged or electrocuted, but then he was released after a certain amount of time, after a certain number of years. The Franks boy doesn't get a second shot at being alive. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is this book is full of interesting speculation, but it's not quite as groundbreaking as the cover verbiage might lead you to believe. It's thought-provoking, is a better way to put it. It goes at every established assumption about this case fresh and with a lot of energy. You'll love it for that. That's the reason why you will. Then this next one, Leopold and Loeb, was famous. There wasn't a newspaper in the country that wasn't covering it 24 hours a day, especially once Clarence Darrow was involved. Not all horrific true crime stories in America, there have been plenty of them. Not all of them are as famous. Some of them are local phenomena until an author comes along and decides there's a bigger story here. And that's what happened. Daniel Stashauer, his new book in September is American Demon, which is, the subtitle is Eliot Ness and the Hunt for America's Jack the Ripper. And this is the Mad Butcher of Cleveland. And Eliot Ness is one of the Eliot Ness of Untouchables fame is one of the major characters in here. But there are a lot of minor characters, and Stashauer has gone through a huge amount of primary reporting on the subject that is fascinating. This was a serial killer who carved up victims with very neat precision. You Jack the Ripper fans, you true crime fans who know and love the story of Jack the Ripper, you won't need more than one description of a crime here to immediately, that sounds a lot like Jack the Ripper. In terms of time, in terms of coldness of execution, in terms of the nature of what was done, how it very much, that's how this killer got the nickname, is that it very much looked like someone was just dressing people for meat. There was no sentimental element. These clearly were not crimes of the normal kind of stab passion. And you get that in some of the aspects of Jack the Ripper as well. This was terrific, absolutely terrific. And unlike the Leopold and Loeb book, there isn't a whole lot of competition in the past. There aren't a whole lot of preliminary studies here. So you true crime fans out there, this is going to be one of the best true crime books of the year. There's no doubt in my mind, unless there's a flood of great ones coming out. I don't think so. This author's terrific, and he's found a fantastic subject. And then the third item in our true crime triptych, I'm calling a crime because it had no justification whatsoever and resulted in the deaths of many innocents. We've seen it already. This is James Scott's Black Snow, a big new history of the firebombing of Tokyo in World War II. That I have read it. It's fantastic. It's incredibly gripping. It is macabre. You will not like what you're reading at all. You will wish badly that you were reading about people you could comfortably call the bad guys. And history books, standard history, the kind of MAGA history that is going to be taught in this country to the exclusion of anything else in just a couple of years, won't allow you to call these people bad guys. They won't allow anything about this subject to be called villainous. They won't allow books like this to be published. But this makes it pretty clear that there was no military, social, or otherwise justification for what was done here. And that it was done to innocents. To people who had no control over what their government was doing and no control over what you do to them as a response to it. So it's horrifying, but really, really good. And I'm lumping it bratishly in with the true crime triptych. and then we'll leave the triptychs behind because you're sick of hearing me say the word. And we'll just do a string of individual books. Like, for instance, science fiction. This one crept up on me. I started reading it and I started thinking, okay, well, you know how we're always told nowadays that this thing that I'm reading is a novel, when it's clearly not. The main character has the same name as the author. The main character is doing, saying, thinking, writing, works, lives, parents, siblings, lovers, all the same as the author has exhaustively documented on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. There is no fiction in this book, but you've called it a novel. The publisher has called it a novel. The author is being feted as a novelist. And I've just learned to sort of roll with that and try to look at what's being done in the book, whether I'm being lied to about what it is or not, because that's clearly the way of the future. If I just object every time a book is self-evidently mislabeled, self-evidently deceitfully labeled, then all I'll do is be objecting. There might still be something worthwhile to sift through there. And I have that same kind of reaction with this book. This is We Spread by Ian Reid. When I was reading it at first, I thought, okay, well, this is a very good novel about getting old. The populace of the world. I was reading it. It's about a quirky, sort of idiosyncratic artist who's not young anymore, not by a long shot. She's living alone, and she's starting to make mistakes. Things are starting to go wrong. She's starting to realize that horrible realization that it's probably not okay for her to be living alone anymore. So she goes into a sort of a retirement facility, a rest home facility, that at first seems lovely. It first seems to answer all of the worries that she had about living in her rat trap apartment, her wonderfully described, overburdened apartment. But something weird is going on at the rest home. Let's just put it that way. And right when I was thinking, okay, well, I don't know why you're calling it this. Maybe the author is really young and thinks that just old age in general is science fiction-y. I can attest to that, but it is still rather condescending. But then a science fiction element, a fantasy, a weird element enters into this very convincingly. I really enjoyed it. I got the strong feeling when I finished it that this is one of those books I will go back and reread. I'd almost have to do that. So those of you who like that sort of thing, that's coming out. Then we have this is from I think Oxford University Press. It's going to be expensive, probably $40, maybe $50. I thought it was excellent. It's a painter I really like. This is The Portraitist, Frans Hals and His World, and this is written by Stephen Nadler, and it's all about Frans Hals and the people in his portraits and the constant financial situations that he was in. He led a typical artist life in a lot of ways, always short of money, always grubbling for patrons, very passionate, but often not very nice to know. And Nadler captures everything, just everything. This was such a good artist biography. It is expensive, so I don't know. You might want to let your library know about it, maybe, or save up your pennies, or put it on a wish list, or something like that. But I wanted you to know that it's coming out in case you're interested. I'm not sure how many people are interested in pre-2022 artists. I'm not sure. Right now, I'm not sure if you're even allowed to be. I'm sure that you could get a Frans Hals original painting for $1 on eBay because he's a dead white man. I don't have any idea what the state of the current art market is, and so I don't have any idea whether or not Frans Hals has any fans other than me. I think his work is great. He's largely known for a couple of paintings, but all of his work is fascinating. And when I was reading this book, I naturally thought about another book that I wanted to recommend to you, even though it's not new. It was once upon a time new. This is by Michael Kernan. It's a novel called The Lost Diaries of Frans Hals, and it's terrific. It's a historical novel, sort of interspliced with the present day of the novel. Heartbreakingly for you Americans out there, you'll be able to take one look at this cover and know when the present day was. The rest of the world heals a lot faster than we do when it comes to wounds on our own body, but those are the Twin Towers in the inset there to connote the present day. And when I bought this novel, and when everyone bought this novel, and when I was reading it, it never crossed my mind that those things could be knocked down other than by demolition crews whose intent was to do that. It never crossed my mind that a foreign government would send planes as weapons to destroy those two buildings. And not to venture too far afield here, but it never crossed my mind that if you had told me, well, two planes flown by people who apparently have very little in the way of flight experience are going to crash into those buildings one after another in order to strike a blow against American hegemony or whatever. If you told me that is going to happen, I would then have responded, oh, so 10,000 people died in Lower Manhattan, right? Because those buildings would have fallen on the buildings and the residential and business neighborhoods all around them. In other words, if you told me when I read this book that was going to happen, I'd have said the only way those buildings could fall straight down would be if they were taken down by demolition intentionally. Otherwise, you fly a plane into them, they're going to fall sideways. Anyway, this takes place. The present-day parts of this book are forgivable. They're fairly good. They can be energetic. They're funny at times. But it's Michael Kernan's reimagination of Frans Hals' life. That is the reason to read this. You see, it's the same painting. I just realized it's the same painting on both covers. Well, I guess he's famous for only a few paintings. But this is from 30 years ago, but I wanted to recommend it just in case you see it in a used bookstore or something like that. This has the Steve seal of approval. This was quite good. I intend to snap up the next copy that I see. Then our next one is Nature, and it's something that I've already shown you on this channel. I've read it. It's not a long thing. I can praise it. It's fantastic. Beautifully, beautifully written. It's Fen, Bog, and Swamp by Andy Proulx. And it's all about wetlands. And so fens, bogs, swamps, saltwater marshes, that sort of thing. The kinds of junk lands, as real estate developers said, until just the 1980s. That once upon a time were prey to relentless urban sprawl development. Once upon a time, urban planners, people of all stripes, everyone except naturalists, looked at ground like that and thought, that's just ugly. It's a breeding ground for mosquitoes. It's got snakes and alligators in some parts of the country. It's not doing anybody any good. It's not pretty like a pine forest. So let's just fill it in. We'll drain it, we'll fill it in, and we'll make it, useful. We'll put housing developments there, or a freeway, or parking lots. It's only comparatively recently that people are starting to see the full ecological benefit of these borderlands, these wetlands. And this is Annie Proulx writing about that, and she has a larger ecological purpose in mind, which is to warn people that we get rid of these things at our peril. Our ecosystem depends on them. But the book is also beautiful. Just an amazing nature writing book. So again, I like with a couple of other books on this list, I find it hard to believe that this book won't be on my celebrated year-end best and worst books of the year for nature writing. It doesn't get much better than this. So I wanted to make sure you saw it again. And then the last thing, we'll finish up this TBR for September with a perfectly legitimate pick. I haven't mentioned any romance novels yet, but I will be reading them. There are plenty of them coming out in September. And one of them is a Black Dagger Brotherhood prison camp novel by J.R. Ward. J.R. Ward is the author of all of the Black Dagger Brotherhood novels about super sexy, supernatural warriors who live forever and are constantly falling in love with mortal women. And J.R. Ward has done a spin-off series called Black Dagger Brotherhood Prison Camp, and the latest one of those is The Viper. Perfectly legitimate thing for me to show you. It's a major release romance from a major author in the genre. So there you go. So that's it. That finishes our September TBR BY, partially TBR BY, partially just TBR for you for September. Some things that are coming out in September. And maybe, like I said, I could do a lot of these. There's a lot of books coming out in September. Maybe we could do another one of these. And I should do TBRs for the events, the various BookTube events that I'm involved in. But that's going to have to wait. This video's gone on long enough. So I'll wrap this up for now, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.